Good mythical afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Ayala with another video lesson for you. This is 5.1 Colonial Resistance. As always, please make sure to be writing your notes. And that is not only just the information that is presented on the screen, but also the information that I am saying. So turn off your YouTube, your music, or whatever other items are in the background that are distracting you. Focus, relax, and let's write some notes. So, first of all, we're going to start with our objectives. So, you'll be able to describe the steps that the King of Britain, George III, took to reign in the British American colonies. You'll be able to describe how the British American colonists resisted the British King's control. And you'll be able to explain the effects on the British American colonies due to the increase of British control. So, first of all, let's start with King George III, the King of England. After the French and Indian War, the British Crown was highly in debt. And he wanted to appease his Native American allies that fought with him and to reduce the amount of money that he needs to pay for protection in the British American colonies, aka North America. So, at first, he puts in the Proclamation of 1763, which halted westward expansion, more or less stated that no British colonist may go westward up the Appalachian Mountains. Past Appalachian Mountains, they will not be protected, and it is for the Native Americans themselves, no one else. Then, to try to get some more revenue coming in 1764, the British Parliament passes the Sugar Act, which taxed sugar, molasses, and any other sugared products. And though it actually reduces the taxes on these products, it increases the number of products being taxed. He was trying to reduce the amount of smuggling by making it cheaper to buy these items, and also increase the number of products being taxed so that the crown can get more revenue. But this, of course, is going to anger the colonists, not because they don't want to pay for their protection, but because they do not have any representation in the British Parliament. So they come up with the motto, no taxation without representation. And to try to get rid of these protests and to reduce the tax burden on the British Crown for having all these troops in the colonies, in 1765, the Quartering Act was passed. So the king brings over 10,000 troops and requires the colonists to house them. When they're there, they're of course going to make sure that these colonists are listening to the law, including the Stamp Act, which was passed in 1765, which requires all legal and commercial documents to have a stamp showing a tax was paid. It was more or less a tax on paper. And this yet again enrages the colonists, because they're like, bro, I do apologize for that quick jump cut, but anyway, it's like, bro, we have no representation in Parliament, so you have no right to tax us. Give us a voice in Parliament, and then we'll talking about being taxed. So what happens is the Sons of Liberty develops, which was a secret society that protested the Stamp Act by either boycotting or refusing to buy these British goods, by tarring and feathering the taxmen. More or less any British official that went around and tried to get taxes from these colonists would be dipped in hot tar and feathers thrown on them, and they more or less would run around until they pass out from pain or exhaustion. So they use both these violent and non-violent means, like the boycott, to show their displeasure with these tax policies. So in 1766, the British Crown begins to get rid of some of these taxes, trying to get the British colonies to relax. But then in 1766, the Declaratory Act was passed, which declared that Parliament had supreme authority over the colonies and the colonists, and that their representative assemblies did not. So it did not matter that the colonies had their own representative assemblies, that they had their own traditions of self-governance, and that them as Englishmen had the right to have a vote in Parliament. It didn't matter. You're colonists, the king rules, and it doesn't matter what you think. So of course, these British colonists, are all kind of mad, over 9,000. But England still needs their revenue or income to help try to pay for this war. So in 1767, the Townshend Acts were passed, and they did three major things. One, it suspended New York's assembly. Two, it placed import taxes on goods coming into the colonies. And three, it used this idea known as writs of assistance, or search warrants, to find and take or seize goods that taxes were not paid on. So I bet you can guess what this is going to do to the colonists. The protests are going to begin immediately. The colonists are like, we're done with this. Samuel Adams, who's the leader of the Sons of Liberty, was the force behind many of these protests. And he will believe that the writs of assistance went against John Locke's theories of government, that the government is searching and seizing people's property without due process. And that was against the social contract. So these boycotts of these British goods spread. And because these British colonists refused to buy British goods, trade is going to fall sharply. Britain is actually going to have more issues because of this. They're going to be more and more into debt. And these newspapers begin to call for nonviolent protests and nonviolent boycotts. But their tempers were short. So it's just going to begin to escalate from here. So in 1768, 10,000 British soldiers arrive in the port of Boston. We call them redcoats because of the red jacket they wore. So on March 5th of 1770, the Boston Massacre breaks out. So more or less, Boston is being controlled by the British. And a fight breaks out between some dock workers, young people, and the British soldiers. So these British American colonists who don't have jobs went to a tavern and got inebriated. And they came out, and these British soldiers were doing their job protecting the State House. And what ended up happening is because they were so drunk and they were so upset about what was going on, they started yelling curse words at these British soldiers, calling their parents lobsterbacks because of the red jacket they wore, and throwing rocks at these British soldiers. And so the soldiers begin to try to protect themselves and fire on the crowd. And 5 people are killed, including the first person, Crispus Attucks, who's shown on the right-hand side of the screen, would be killed. And Crispus Attucks would be considered the first American life lost for the Revolution. And it would be a free African-American man. So think about that. So the Boston Massacre will be used for anti-British propaganda, aka trying to persuade them that this was a lot worse than it was, and it will work. So they go to trial, and John Adams, who would become our second president later, defended these soldiers, said, and he believed that the law should be deaf to the clamors of the populace, that it doesn't matter what people feel about said issue, it is about the law. And he wanted to show that the colonists will follow the law even if the British Crown and Parliament will not. Even though the British Crown is removing the British colonists' rights under the English Bill of Rights and under the Magna Carta, the colonists will still listen to the rule of law. So, a day after the Boston Massacre, Parliament repeals the Townshend Acts. And what this shows is that the boycotts worked. That if you hit the British Parliament and the British Crown in the money bags, aka taking their tax revenue, that is going to really make them have to think. And because that the British colonists, who will later become the Patriots, are concerned about what's happening all over, up and down the New England, the Middle, and Southern colonies, they're going to begin to develop the Committees of Correspondence, which were groups that exchanged letters through the colonies to share this information. It's kind of like a message board or even Reddit, where people will post information and try to share it with everyone. And then in 1773, the Tea Act is going to be passed, which is going to give a tax on tea and given a monopoly to one of the tea companies in England, the East Indian Company. And of course, this is going to take everyone off because this was a tradition to have tea time and crumpets. So what's going to happen is we're going to get to 1773, which is the Boston Tea Party, where the Sons of Liberty, dressed as Native Americans, will sneak on board of these vessels and throw 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor to say, we hate your tax. Then the Daughters of Liberty, which is the female offshoot of the Sons of Liberty, will begin to grow this item known as Liberty tea in their gardens, which is actually coffee, and would be one of the reasons why culturally Americans prefer coffee over tea. Thank you very much for listening to this, and as always, don't forget to be awesome.